Welcome to the debate. We usually think of a secret as something you lock away in a physical safe. You write it down on a piece of paper, you spin the heavy metal dial, and you sleep soundly knowing it's secure.
Right, it's out of your hands.
Exactly. But imagine if the safe was your own mind. Imagine living in a world where everything you said out loud, everything you typed on a keyboard, and everywhere you went was constantly monitored by an omniscient, invisible enemy. The only place you could hide the combination to that safe was, well, behind your own eyes.
And you can never, ever tell another living soul. Not your closest colleagues, not your best friends, not your spouse. Because the moment you speak the truth, the world ends.
Yeah, it's a heavy burden. And that is the terrifying premise at the heart of the Wallfacer project from Liu Cixin's The Dark Forest. To combat an impending alien invasion by the Trisolarans, an enemy whose subatomic surveillance particles, the sophons, can see and hear absolutely everything happening on Earth, humanity realizes they have exactly one tactical advantage.
Just one?
Right. The aliens communicate via direct thought. They literally do not understand the concept of deception, and their sophons, for all their reality-bending power, cannot read the human mind.
So the brain basically becomes the only blind spot in the universe.
Exactly. So the United Nations does something entirely unprecedented in human history. They select 4 individuals. First, Frederick Tyler, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense. Second, Manuel Diaz, the former president of Venezuela. Third, Bill Hines, a brilliant British neuroscientist. And fourth, Luo Ji, a relatively obscure, seemingly lazy astronomer and sociologist.
Very lazy.
Extremely. But the UN grants these 4 men near limitless global authority and resources to formulate a defense plan entirely inside their own heads. They are dubbed the Wallfacers. And today, we are debating the profound psychological toll of this mandate. Did this mask of secrecy, where every single action a Wallfacer takes must be designed to deceive the entire world, did it provide the necessary strategic crucible for humanity's salvation?
And I think we are going to disagree heavily on this.
I think we are. I am taking the position that it absolutely did. The human mind became the ultimate fortress. Relinquishing the ability to ever be understood by your fellow human beings is a massive sacrifice, yes, but it was a vital, ultimately successful mechanism that allowed humanity to outmaneuver an enemy that couldn't lie.
And I look at this from an entirely different angle. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures. We require communication to anchor our reality. Giving individuals absolute, unchecked power while entirely severing them from honest human connection is a guaranteed recipe for psychological collapse.
But it was necessary.
Was it, though? The Wallfacer mandate was an impossible psychological paradox. It didn't just hide their defense plans. It bred madness, megalomania, and profound betrayal. I'd argue it fundamentally destroyed the very humanity these men were meant to save.
I hear that, but aren't we ignoring what that isolation actually achieved? To really understand this, we have to start by looking at the trap they all stepped into on day one. It's what becomes known as the Wallfacer smile.
The most sinister smile in modern science fiction.
It really is. When Luo Ji is first selected, he completely panics. He doesn't want the job. He has no idea why he was picked. So he literally walks right up to the UN Secretary General, and declares point blank, "I reject the position of Wallfacer. I reject all the powers granted it, and I will not undertake any responsibility you force upon me."
A totally normal reaction to being told you have to save the world.
Right. And what does she do? She just smiles at him and says, "You may."
Because the trap has already sprung. As he walks out of the building, the guards smile at him knowingly, the diplomats smile at him. Because the core mandate of the Wallfacer is to deceive the world, right? So even a genuine, desperate refusal to participate is instantly interpreted by everyone as a highly sophisticated layer of deception.
Which is brilliant.
It's a psychological funhouse mirror. It's a completely unfalsifiable position. If you say you're working hard on a plan, you're working. If you say you quit and want to go home, well, that's just part of your secret plan.
But that trap, that unfalsifiable position, is exactly what gives them their immense power. I look at this as a Schrodinger's strategy. As long as the Wallfacer's true intention remains locked in the dark box of their mind, They exist in a superposition of both working and not working simultaneously.
Okay, but
It gave Luo Ji the ultimate freedom. He realizes he can't escape the title, so he uses his limitless authority to demand a secluded estate, expensive wine, and even asks the UN to find his literal dream wife, Zhang Yan. He lives a life of total, unapologetic leisure. But the psychological genius of this setup is that it allows his subconscious to quietly process the monumental problem of cosmic sociology while outwardly baffling the Trisolarans who, can't comprehend why humanity's savior is drinking wine by a fireplace.
come on, to call that subconscious processing is incredibly generous to Luo Ji. He wasn't utilizing a subconscious, he was engaging in pure, unadulterated escapism because the psychological pressure of the role was unendurable.
I wouldn't call it pure escapism.
He admits to feeling an absurd sense of unreality. The Wallfacer smile isn't freedom. Think about the psychology of it. If you put someone in an environment where not a single person interacts with the real them, you are essentially putting their minds in an echo chamber. Without the external social friction of honest conversation to correct our false thoughts or ground us, a feedback loop of paranoia inevitably shatters a person's grasp on reality.
It's a risk, sure.
It's a certainty. The world treated the Wallfacers like messiahs. Cults literally formed around them. But none of that adoration was based on reality. How do you maintain your sanity when every word you speak is analyzed as a multidimensional chess move?
You maintain it by anchoring yourself to the ultimate mission, which is the survival of the species.
But look at what actually happened to the men who tried to anchor themselves to the mission. Let's look at the physical and mental breakdowns of the first two Wallfacers, Frederick Tyler and Manuel Diaz. They didn't find freedom in your Schrodinger's box, they found utter destruction.
Okay, let's talk about Tyler and Ray Diaz. For context, these two men were dealing with apocalyptic hardware. Tyler was secretly planning a massive kamikaze attack against the alien fleet using Earth's own space forces. Ray Diaz was pursuing a strategy of mutually assured destruction, secretly planning to plant millions of nuclear bombs on Mercury to push it into the sun and destroy the entire solar system if humanity was losing.
Right. If we can't have Earth, nobody gets it. But let's not get bogged down in the mechanics of the space battles. Let's focus on the how and why of their psychological destruction. The cognitive dissonance of having to lie to the entire planet literally rewired their brains.
It was definitely a heavy load.
Heavy is an understatement. Tyler has to spend years wandering the globe, pretending to be a savior, looking his own soldiers in the eye, while secretly planning to betray and murder them. The mental toll of that is staggering. And when his Wallbreaker, the human traitor assigned by the aliens to deduce his plan, when he finally confronts him by the lake, the Wallbreaker doesn't just reveal the plan, he delivers the ultimate psychological death blow.
He tells Tyler, "The Lord does not care."
At all. And that is what triggers Tyler's suicide. It wasn't just that his military strategy failed, it was the crushing realization that he had alienated himself from humanity, carried the agonizing weight of this monstrous secret, and fundamentally destroyed his own moral compass for absolutely nothing. The mental bridge collapsed because his reality crumbled.
That is an incredibly tragic reading of the scene, and I agree the cognitive dissonance was high. But I really question your causality here. You are blaming the secrecy for Tyler's breakdown. Was Tyler driven mad by the psychological toll of keeping a secret, or was he simply overwhelmed by the realization that humanity was technologically outmatched?
The secrecy was the isolator, though.
But the tragedy of Tyler wasn't the Wallfacer structure. It was to physics. His plan failed because it relied on trickery that a superior force simply swatted away. It's a hardware failure, not a psychological one.
Okay, if you think Tyler was just a physics problem, let's look at Ray Diaz. The secrecy absolutely broke his mind. We see him develop a debilitating case of heliophobia, a literal, clinical terror of the sun.
True, he couldn't even look at daylight.
Why does that happen? Because of projection. He couldn't process the internalized guilt of secretly planning to destroy the solar system, so his brain manifested that guilt as a physical terror of daylight. He lives completely underground in a bunker, chain-smoking cigars in the dark. And when his Wallbreaker exposes his plan to blow up Mercury, he is declared a terrorist by the UN. He goes back to his home in Venezuela and the very people he thought he was protecting stone him to death in the plaza. The isolation of the mask forced him to view humanity as a hostage, and in doing so, he lost his own humanity.
I hear you, but again, look at how Diaz operates even in the middle of that crisis. He doesn't completely lose his mind. When he's cornered by the Planetary Defense Council, the PDC, and they try to arrest him for crimes against humanity, he is sane and shrewd enough to pull off a brilliant bluff.
You call that sane?
Strategically sane, yes. He shows them his wristwatch and claims it's a dead man's switch tied to a hidden nuclear bomb in New York. He secures his release, gets on a plane back to his home country, and right before he leaves, he calmly hands the watch back to the PDC chair, revealing it was just a modified phone. The mask of secrecy held. He maintained his deceptive fortress right up until the very end. The psychological crucible worked.
I think you're romanticizing a severe trauma response. He faked a nuclear threat against millions of innocent people just to get a flight home. That is the definition of moral and psychological decay. But if you want to talk about this so-called deceptive fortress, we have to talk about the third Wallfacer, Bill Hines. Because with Hines, we move from the external hardware, the ships and the bombs, to the mind itself. And the toll here is much quieter, much more intimate, and to my mind, infinitely more terrifying.
Bill Hines is fascinating. He's a neuroscientist who discovers that the brain operates on a quantum level. His Wallfacer plan involves a mental seal, a machine that can imprint an unshakable, absolute belief into the neurons of a human mind. Publicly, he uses this to instill triumphalism in the Space Force, mechanically guaranteeing that the soldiers will believe humanity is going to win the war.
Right. But his secret, deep down he's a defeatist. He secretly inverted the machine's code. Every single soldier who volunteered to be imprinted with victory was actually imprinted with the absolute, terrifying certainty that humanity would lose and that they must flee the solar system.
And I will argue that Hines is actually a massive success story for the Wallfacer concept. Think about the discipline required to pull that off. He successfully hid his true defeatist worldview for centuries. He navigated the UN, the media, his own scientific teams, and the entire human race.
At a terrible cost.
Sure, but he proves that the human mind can effectively maintain a deceptive fortress. Even the omniscient Sophons didn't see the code inversion coming until it was too late.
That's a great strategic point, but have you considered the epistemological horror of what it took to achieve that? Hines couldn't even tell his own wife, Keiko Yamasuki, who was also his co-researcher. Think about the reality of this. She spent years in the quiet bamboo groves of Kyoto, staring at her husband's sleeping face, listening to him mumble in his sleep, desperately trying to find the truth beneath his mask.
Yeah, the isolation of that is staggering. To be lying in bed next to the person you love most in the universe and knowing that you can never, ever let them see your true face.
Exactly. The Wallfacer project turns marriage into an echo chamber of suspicion. And the devastating climax to this is that Keiko Yamasuki ultimately realizes his betrayal. She stands up at a UN hearing 2 centuries later and announces, "Wallfacer Bill Hines, I am your Wallbreaker." It highlights how the mandate of secrecy utterly destroys human intimacy and trust.
It's a heartbreaking scene.
It is. He endured the torture of isolation, yes, but he destroyed his marriage in the process. When Keiko confronts him, she says she saw his desire to just bury his head in her arms and weep, to finally seek release from the lie. But the duty of the Wallfacer prevented him. That isn't a strategic victory. That is psychological torture.
I don't disagree that it is torture. I really don't. But I maintain that it was the only viable path. And the proof of that lies entirely with Luo Ji. He outlasts Tyler, Diaz, and Hines. His arc is the ultimate test of whether the survival of the species justifies the torment of the individual.
Luo Ji's evolution is certainly the core of the whole experiment. I'll give you that.
He evolves from this lazy, hedonistic intellectual who just wants to drink wine in a chateau into the ultimate sword holder. Through the absolute crucible of his isolation, he formulates cosmic sociology and the dark forest theory.
Let's make sure we clarify that theory for a second.
Right, so he realizes that the universe is essentially a dark forest at night. every civilization is a silent, armed hunter stalking through the trees. If you make a sound, if you reveal your location, a stronger hunter will instantly wipe you out to eliminate the threat. So Luo Ji figures out that he can secure deterrence against the Trisolarians by threatening to broadcast their homeworld's coordinates to the rest of the universe.
Which would condemn both them and Earth to destruction by some unknown third party.
Exactly. Another mutually assured destruction plan, just on a cosmic scale. But this one works. And the reason Luo Ji maintains his sanity while the others broke is precisely because he anchors himself to his love for his wife, Juanyan, and his daughter. When the UN eventually puts his family into forced hibernation to compel him to work, literally ripping away his escapist fantasy, that extreme psychological pressure successfully pushes him to formulate the theory.
But look at how he was forced to do it.
Think about what he endures. He then goes on to serve as the sword holder for 50 years. 50 years of absolute silence, sitting in a stark white bunker, staring at a blank wall, holding the broadcast trigger that could end 2 worlds. The psychological resilience forced upon him by the Wallfacer mandate saved humanity.
I have to push back hard on your use of the word resilience. Did Luo Ji actually demonstrate resilience, or was he simply hollowed out into a cold, silent machine? Look at the mechanism of his transformation. He didn't act out of some grand moral awakening or duty to his fellow man. He acted out of pure, unadulterated coercion.
It was a push, yes.
It was blackmail. The system took his family hostage. The UN literally froze his wife and child and said, "You don't get them back until you figure out how to save the world."
It was a brutal calculus by the UN, absolutely. But what was the alternative? The extinction of the human race.
But what kind of human race is surviving? The tragedy of Luo Ji is that the only way to survive the Wallfacer project was to let it strip away everything that made you human. By the time he becomes the sword holder, he barely speaks, he has lost language, he has lost emotional connection, and even after he saves humanity, how does the world treat him?
Well, not great, admittedly.
They don't throw him a parade, they view him as a monster. The moment he steps down from his 50-year vigil, the public tries to have him arrested for mundicide, the murder of a world, because the proof-of-concept test he ran decades earlier ended up destroying a distant star.
I see the tragedy in how he was treated, truly, but you have to separate the ungratefulness of the public from the efficacy of the strategy itself. The human mind is fallible, yes. It cracks under pressure. Tyler cracked, Diaz cracked, but Luo Ji held the line. Let me offer a different analogy.
Go for it.
Think of the Wallfacers like deep-sea divers pushed into an ocean trench without a submersible. The immense pressure of the water is the absolute scrutiny of the Trisolarans and the entire human race. You're arguing that the pressure crushed their lungs and broke their minds. I'm arguing that the pressure compressed the carbon of Luo Ji's mind into a diamond. It forced human strategic thinking to an evolutionary peak that it never, ever would have reached in the comfort of transparent communication.
That's a beautiful metaphor. But diamonds are cold, dead things, and that's exactly what Luo Ji had to become. The Wallfacer project is like taking someone, putting them in total sensory and emotional isolation, and telling them that if they ever express a single honest feeling, their species dies. It fundamentally breaks the mind.
It changes it, yes.
It broke it. It warped Tyler into a traitor. It warped Diaz into a planetary hostage taker. It warped Hines into a psychological manipulator. And it forced Luo Ji into a state of unnatural, coercive detachment.
So as we look at the big picture of this debate, I think we have reached a really fascinating point of convergence. Even within our disagreement, we both acknowledge that the psychological toll of the Wallfacer's smile and the mandate of absolute secrecy was immense and personally devastating to Tyler, Diaz, Hines, and Luo Ji.
Oh, absolutely. The trauma inflicted on those 4 individuals and their families is undeniable.
But where there remains intention is the ultimate justification of that trauma. I'm taking the stance that the psychological crucible of the Wallfacer mandate, though incredibly brutal, was the only viable weapon we had against a transparent, technologically superior enemy. The human mind's capacity to build a labyrinth of deception was our only asymmetrical advantage, and Luo Ji's ultimate success in establishing dark force deterrence proves that the sacrifice was worth it.
And my stance is that the survival of the species cannot be entirely divorced from human psychology. The project relied on profound psychological destruction. It risked the fate of the entire solar system on the fraying sanity of men pushed far past the limits of human endurance. It proved that absolute isolation breeds monsters, and the fact that we survived was luck just as much as it was strategy.
It forces us to confront incredibly uncomfortable questions about the limits of the human mind. When completely severed from honest connection, there's so much more to explore in Liu Cixin's The Dark Forest regarding cosmic sociology and the true nature of survival.
It really does challenge every assumption we have about communication, sanity, and trust.
We will leave it up to our listeners to decide for themselves. When humanity's back is truly against the wall, is the mask of secrecy a necessary shield or a fatal poison? Think back to that omniscient enemy, that invisible surveillance. If the only safe you have left is your own mind, well, what happens when you lose the combination?